One down, 3 to go. Welcome viewers, I am Ferris, and it's time for week 2 of Deltarune December. Last week we looked at Kris, and this week we're going to focus our everlasting gaze upon the visage of Susie Deltarune. Susie is a character I've wanted to get into for a bit, and she's come up occasionally in other video essays, funnily enough the Kris ones most commonly, so it'll be great to dedicate some specific time to going over her as a character in the spotlight. Without further ado, let's all take a journey along the road of character analysis and see what we can glean about the purple dinosaur lizard creature that we all know and love. Join me, won't you? Firstly, it's important to set up what we know about Susie herself, which is actually pretty little. We know that she's a kid in hometown like all of Kris's classmates and has probably been here for a bit. It's demonstrated that she has a consistent history of delinquency and misbehaviour that stretch back decently far by a few different accounts. Aside from that, people know very little about her outside the fact that she's scary. Most don't get close, and Susie doesn't let them. Susie's defining characteristic is her unique personality and how it intersects with the other members of the fun gang and the entire conceit of Deltarune. Susie is, at least a little, the trope of the bully who isn't actually awful and mean but is just misunderstood. As a victim of bullying at school, I'm less sympathetic to this trope than others. Just because someone has an excuse for their behaviour doesn't make it okay. A bit like Kris with their ominous activities though, this doesn't make her irredeemable or even a bad person. Like everyone here, she's a kid too, dealing with her own problems without the maturity or help of others around her. Susie is similar to Kris in more ways than just this though. Susie isolates herself from the rest of society as well, but this is done in a much more active way than just withdrawing. Instead, Susie asserts her own place in this world, not living on the outskirts like Kris. She is loud, brash, and commanding. If she wants to be somewhere, then she will be, and curses to anyone who doesn't want her there. It definitely paints a portrait of her past life experiences, that she has to defend her own existence in any space and take what she can, as it was never offered to her. There's a specific tidbit regarding Kris that a lot of people find interesting that was revealed by the Spampton sweepstakes information. The start of the game isn't the first time that Susie and Kris have interacted. Kris has honestly been the victim of Susie's bullying for a while, though it's unclear why. It's likely because Kris is a bit of an easy pick, but it's not like they ever seem to have much of a reaction to whatever Susie has done or said. The incident depicted in the Spampton sweepstakes of Kris saying something to Susie that made her flip out highlights another interesting quirk of Susie's personality. Despite her posturing and aggression, she's actually very sensitive. It's one of the very reasons that she pushes people away so much. She's worried that people will think differently of her, that people will hate or dislike her, that she's learnt to draw first blood as a coping mechanism. It creates this vicious cycle where she asserts herself as the monster that other people wish to see, which reinforces the way people see her. We see this in the Dark World as well, with her being so used to the world she lives in and the terrible lessons she's learnt that she butts head with Ralsei so much, leading to her short villain arc. To be fair though, it's difficult to define what she does with Lancer as villainous. That's kind of the point that I was mentioning earlier though. Susie isn't a bad person, she isn't a villain. The worst thing she does, try to kill Lancer and I guess Kris, is because she feels betrayed. She just wants to be herself, mess around and not take things so seriously. Ultimately, she doesn't want pressure, because it's only been bad for her in the past. This is one of the reasons that Kris is so important for Susie. Kris doesn't judge Susie for a potential myriad of reasons, and gives her a place where she can be herself, free of expectations. Susie, who isn't used to having friends, or seemingly people who actually care for her well-being, is more prepared to be responsible for Kris because she sees them as something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. The Dark Worlds are a true blessing for Susie considering this. She can exist in a world that allows her to be free despite the dangers and troubles. Lancer is honestly a great influence on her, as he has this very unique type of villainy which isn't so much evil, but more comical. It's a style rooted in humour and a very childlike sense of superiority, very Saturday morning cartoon-esque. Even with a rocky start to her relationship with Ralsei, eventually this connection becomes important to her as well, both in a character progression sense as well as in-universe. Essentially, this is a place where, for the first time, she doesn't need to be aggressive or violent to have a sense of control. And there's the moneymaker. The theme of control within Deltarune is a big one, and Susie interacts with it a lot. When Susie tells you that your choices don't matter at the start of the game, within the universe of Deltarune itself, it's meant to be her telling Kris that she is in control no matter what, and whatever Kris does won't impact things. This tug of war of control continues in the rest of Chapter 1, with you unable to control Susie and having to help your enemies before she slaughters them. This control that Susie feels like she needs is a trademark of kids who have grown up in unstable environments, so it's not a surprise that it's part of the package of her past. Where this really comes to a head though is in contrast to King. The fact that a comparison is explicitly drawn between Susie and King through the "quiet people piss me off" line should be seen as a clue for us to look deeper at further similarities between them. Aside from superficial similarities, Susie and King both have a complex around being in control. King's perspective stems from being perceived as abandoned by the Lightners, cast aside in an abandoned closet where no one interacts or engages with them in any way. King wants to take his kingdom back by force if he has to, and then bring this darkness into the light world to make the Lightners feel the same pain that he did, to seize back control from them and put it in his hands. Eagle-eyed, or eared I guess, viewers would be able to notice that this is somewhat similar to Susie's situation. Both of them are asserting a place in society that does not want them, and reclaiming the control put out of their reach using force and aggression. However, by the time that Susie and King actually meet, Susie is not sympathetic to him at all, which is interesting. Part of the reason for this is the type of villainy that Susie and King both embody, something I briefly mentioned earlier in the video. With Lancer, Susie is much more laid back and more generally mean, foiling Kris and Ralsei with skirmishes and inconveniences. She doesn't want to kill them or anything, she just wants to be free to do what she wants, which, because she's Susie, is mostly just to joke around and be a nuisance. However, this is a contrast even to how we first see her in the light world, as if her time in the dark world, especially with Lancer, has already given her a bit of levity and happiness. In the light world, Susie is menacing in a way that I kind of forgot after all of chapters 1 and 2. I mean, she does actively threaten your life. She's pretty awful here. That's what happens when she feels unable to do anything apart from reinforcing everyone's opinions of her. However, experiencing the freedom that the dark worlds have to offer changes that a little. It's not until Lancer shows up, someone who, unlike Ralsei, absolutely does not judge Susie whatsoever to a degree of complete obliviousness, where Susie realizes that this experience might not be all that bad. Then the game happens, and I'll spare you my summary of Chapter 1, but essentially Lancer helps reframe Susie's approach. He shows her, probably unintentionally, that having a buddy to go through things with and have fun with makes all the difference in the world. This makes his betrayal even worse for Susie and brings her back to that dark place she was in at the start of the game, but even still gets through to her by talking it out. Lancer's great, man. Him being great is part of what makes the King reveal work so well, especially for Susie. The thing is, King is fucking evil. Like, he will kill anyone and anything to get what he wants. He really is a mirror as to what Susie could have become with enough time, power, and bitterness. Thanks to the fun gang though, Susie doesn't get a chance to get to that point. King, despite his minions and Lancer, feels alone. He feels abandoned by the Lightners, and this corrupts him, his soul cast into true darkness. The power he obtains is for one purpose and one purpose only, to rule over both dark and light worlds. Susie thankfully doesn't need this. Thanks to the power of thrash machines, nature's salsa, and yes, friendship, Susie rises above the lot that life has cast her and creates a space for her and, for the first time, those she wishes to protect, to be safe and strong in the face of calamity. But what of her character in Chapter 2? Well, the theme of control and freedom is certainly still prevalent. After all, the only time where you, as a player, can properly exert your control over Noelle is when Susie is absent. That brings us to the big point though, which is Noelle Holiday, though this is relevant even before Chapter 2. Like in the Kris video, I want to talk about how this relationship affects Susie, but it'll certainly come up again in the Noelle video. Susie feels differently around Noelle than others, and it's definitely a unique relationship. Instead of being judgment-free or otherwise indifferent, Susie kind of actively cares about what Noelle thinks of her. She tolerates a lot more teasing from her, and of course, Susie never really bullied Noelle. It seems like she might have had a bit of interest in her before everything we see in Deltarune, and with how quickly Noelle seems interested as well, I wouldn't be surprised if it was reciprocal. What Susie has with Noelle, romantic or not, is someone she can be vulnerable with. Of course she can be relaxed with the others, but Noelle is someone who doesn't just tolerate or understand her imperfections, she's someone who likes them, and this does wonders for Susie's confidence. Her actual character doesn't change that much from chapters 1 to 2, but we definitely see her soften up a bit more, which makes sense, as she's not the main focus of chapter 2 anyway. Noelle is also an incentive for Susie to maintain the emotional openness that she has begun to exhibit, as Susie very clearly does want to be closer with Noelle, a contrast compared to someone like Kris or Ralsei, who they kind of stumbled into. It gives Susie something to work towards, to encourage her, which is really important for the future of her characterization and the game as a whole. I know there are a lot of theories around the idea of Susie leaving the party again or facing some kind of betrayal, none have wowed me though, and it's my belief that the relationship she forges with Noelle will be instrumental in both of their outcomes. Susie is a complex kid, just like Kris, who acts out from a lack of attention, control, and closeness. Through her experiences with the fun gang, both in and out of the Dark Worlds, she learns to open up more and not become necessarily nicer, but more self-aware and considerate to those around her. That in turn leads to better outcomes for her and those around her, a really inspirational and positive message to be depicting. Not only that, but Susie acts as a commentary on the concept of freedom, how it can be given and taken away, and no doubt will her character path intersect with the grander picture in the coming chapters. I, for one, am very excited to see what she has in store for us. And with that, week 2 is officially done. This is a much awaited topic for me to talk about, so I hope I've done it justice. Love me some Susie. I highly doubt this will be the last time I talk about Susie on this channel though, but I think this covers some pretty basic ground. Hell, I might even talk about her before another chapter comes out, but I've got some plans for that. Anyway, thanks as always for watching, and for the good reception on the Kris video too. I think this one will be a lot less controversial, and also probably a bit more novel since there's less Susie analysis, both on this channel and on YouTube as a whole. A magnificent thank you to my marvellous patrons, Michael Bates, Meggie, Zalgo, Tybee Fitzhugh and Nigel Robinson for all their support. Don't forget to check out the Patreon in the description as well as my standard socials to see what I get up to. Until next time, I've been Veritas, and I'll see you again soon.